and it takes about 20 seconds to perpetuate a cycle of racial stereotypes and prejudices that are hundreds of years old. See, it starts in the classroom with the encouragement of white women to become teachers. White women receive the recommendation to become teachers around the age 9, which is 3rd grade, while black boys will never receive this recommendation. Many black boys will go through the school system believing that they are not gentle, smart, kind, or creative enough to be a teacher. Now, it starts in the classroom with this view as one white female teacher, one black male student, and one white student. Black men make up around 2% of all teachers in America, as opposed to 75% white women. And I want to explain why this is. Now, some of you might be wondering why I chose to present on this topic today, but there is no magic puzzle piece to make it make sense. I care about diversity and inclusion, so I chose to share this all with you. Now, it starts in the classroom on a small scale, but on a much larger scale, it starts a long time ago, on the very tip of the African coast, in a small town called Cape Town, South Africa. This was the first town to be settled by European colonists in Africa. Africa was regarded as a land of extreme opportunities and great resources. However, it was quickly stigmatized as a land of terrible and savage people. Credible authors of the time, such as Rudyard Kipling, author of The Jungle Book, published poems, one titled The White Man's Burden, where he described the white man's burden to, quote, civilize African natives. Kipling describes African people as your new-caught, sullen people, half devil and half tribal. This is where we see the start of stereotypes regarding black intellects. Now keep in mind, we're in an era before Google or Wiki or fact-checking. So people that heard stories of far-off land had to take them at face value because there was simply no way to prove otherwise. So we fast forward a few years, and we see the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, where some 10.5 million African people were taken from their homes and families and forced into slavery in the Americas. As we know, black people were barred from many human rights. One of the most debilitating, however, being the right to read and write, and in some cases even speak. Slave owners believed that if they allowed black people to read and write, they would be able to organize themselves, possibly through letters, and revolt against their oppressors. So this right was strictly prohibited. However, even though it was highly illegal, some black people often taught themselves to read and write by using household books like Bibles. Now, although they had infinite odds stacked against their education, historians have noted an unquenchable desire to learn to read and write among the black community. This was seen with the formation of incredibly strong black educational communities that can still be seen today in schools such as HBCUs, which are historically black colleges and universities. In the period immediately after the abolition of slavery, we see Union troops occupying the South for around 9 years to enforce this Emancipation Proclamation. However, and this was a great time of success for black people in America, including black legislators like Hiram Revels being elected in 1870. However, when the 9 years was up and Union troops returned to the North, this progress was quickly halted. And Hiram Revels was the last black legislator to be elected for almost 100 years. This is when we see the start of the segregation, or Jim Crow era, which is best outlined by a Supreme Court case known as Plessy v. Ferguson. Plessy v. Ferguson is actually a Louisiana case about public transportation, in which the Supreme Court upheld that it was completely legal to keep facilities segregated by race as long as they were equal, which equal is incredibly subjective, and often these facilities were anything but equal. The schools that black students were filtered into lacked funding and support from the government. And again, we see strong black educational communities rising above, which depended on black men, women, and children alike. The end of the segregation era was marked by Ruby Bridges, the first African-American student to attend an all-white public school here in New Orleans, Louisiana. This was a huge step forward for black students. However, the same can't be said about teacher and administrator demographics. In fact, teacher and administrator demographics have remained largely the same for 60 years, which is when the end of the segregation period was. And I want to explain to you all why this is. We have an incredibly low amount of representation for black men. There are many factors that contribute to this, such as a negative schooling environment. And when they do choose to become teachers, they often don't stay very long. One black man stated, "It's never the kids, it's always the other stuff. It's always people doubting your competence." See, black men attributed around 10% of their reason for wanting to leave due to factors such as age, salary, and sex. However, 17%, which is almost double, attributed this to microaggressions. Microaggressions are statements, actions, or incidents regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. Microaggressions are often acted upon due to stereotypes that we have adopted into our society, similar to the stereotypes that I described earlier in my presentation. Now, this combination of stereotypes and microaggressions contributes to this negative environment that can be observed in schools. One black man stated that returning to a school to teach would be like returning to the scene of a crime committed against you. Take that in for a second. The scene of a crime committed against you. Who would want to return to a traumatic or negative environment like that? Now, factors such as microaggressions and stereotypes can often contribute to something called internalized self-doubt among students. Internalized self-doubt is when the doubting ideas of others begin to perpetuate in one's own mind, and members of a marginalized group truly begin to believe that they are inferior to their peers. But this doesn't always happen. Take Adam, for example. Adam is a black student from Minnesota who is known for a pretty long disciplinary history and some remarkably low test scores. However, after 2 years and 3 black male teachers, Adam had identified and pursued a passion for slam poetry and even won several competitions. An improvement was seen in Adam's behavior and in his grades. This is what positive representation can do for black students across the world. But the question is, how do we replicate stories such as Adam? The answer is we make our schools a more welcoming and positive environment for everyone around us. We take note of any stereotypes that we might be acting upon, and we make sure not to perpetuate those any longer. In America, we teach our children that they can do or be anything that they want to be. How can you say that with a straight face if you support these rigid social roles or you subscribe to these stereotypical ideals? Now, it's one thing to hear you can do or be anything, but it's a million times more convincing to see other people that look like you doing the work. And that's why representation matters. Thank you.
All right.